Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the 12th of December 2011, the podcast that's longer than the shortest podcast and shorter than the longest one. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's cherry bomb the news of the bogus. If you want to know about the negative consequences of using police force against voluntary action, as is the case with, for example, the war on drugs, the best thing you can do is talk to police officers themselves and get the benefits of their first-hand experience. But what if police officers all over the country were prohibited from telling the truth about the harm caused by our government's drug war? That's what Brian Gonzalez found was actually the case when he told a fellow Border Patrol agent that, if marijuana were legalized, drug-related violence from Mexico would disappear. When Border Patrol headquarters found out about this comment, Gonzalez was terminated. This isn't an isolated incident. Arizona police officer Joe Miller also lost his job after he added his name to a letter expressing support for marijuana decriminalization. Miller has now filed suit in federal district court with the support of the Arizona ACLU. These and other officers have faced persecution and even termination when they have tried to join or express support for the organization Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, or LEAP. The organization boasts membership from judges, police officers, prosecutors, prison guards, and other law enforcement officials, but most of them are retired because of the dangers of law enforcement officers speaking their opinions while employed by the government. The statist thugs have their rhetoric all ready. In Gonzalez's termination record, the Border Patrol official said that it was because of Gonzalez's, quote, personal views that were contrary to core characteristics of Border Patrol agents, which are patriotism, dedication, and esprit de corps. Funny, I didn't realize you gave up your fundamental rights to freedom of speech when you went to work for the government. I also didn't realize that patriotism, dedication, and esprit de corps meant silently consenting to tyranny. I guess all of those characteristics were lacking in our founders. Kip Anderson, Superior Court goon for Mojave County, gave this excuse for Miller's termination, quote, "This isn't about legalization. We're not taking a stand on that. We just didn't want people to think he was speaking on behalf of the probation department." Then why did you fire him? In such a case, you issue a statement of clarification, and it doesn't even match reality because the letter he signed specifically included a disclaimer that all agency affiliations were listed for identification purposes only. Another pathetic excuse. If the play Inherit the Wind were written today, Bertram Cates would be a police officer and the issue would be the drug war. If the only cops allowed to state their opinions are the corrupt ones supporting government tyranny, then the right to think has absolutely been abolished without trial. It seems like all the time we're hearing about yet another FDA action favoring the profits of big pharmaceutical corporations over the rights of the individual. But that's just when they make a clear policy. When their policy is confusing and contradictory, it's much worse. Such is the case with your right to know what's in your own genome. It's increasingly the case that, for a lower and lower price, you can go and have your entire genome sequenced and read. But the FDA has stepped in and says that such sequencing must be regulated as a medical test. Over the last couple of years, they have sent letters to 23 different providers of genetic information saying they were providing medical tests not vetted by the FDA. But even when they were directly requested to do so, the FDA offered no information or guidance as to what information would be permissible to reveal and what wouldn't. Some expressed their fears that the FDA was trying to unilaterally expand its own authority. Folks, this is a perfect example of the kind of government regulatory activity that has increased uncertainty in our market to the point where investors are afraid to provide capital, companies are hesitant to develop new products, startups are afraid to enter the industry, and companies move or form overseas to avoid the burdens and uncertainties. This isn't just bad for people who simply want to know what's in their own genes, it's bad for the entire economy. On a more practical level, these genomics corporations might be afraid to release medically relevant information about genetic risk factors, which could backfire, exposing them to litigation for failing to inform their customers about these risks. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. You own your body. If you don't, you're a slave. It's as simple as that. But now it seems the FDA is claiming authority over the very content of the cells that make up your own body. If they can do that, what possible intrusion could they be limited from imposing? Is your cell phone bill too high? For years, people have complained that their bill ends up costing more than their plan is supposed to. But the answer to why this is not the greed of the telcos, as Chris Pirillo of LockRenome.com found out.
This bill seemed extraordinarily high, like about $30 more than what I was used to paying. $30 was reserved for fees, charges, and taxes. So there apparently is a 49-cent regulatory cost recovery charge. Does anybody know what that means?
Yes, your phone company has to pay money complying with government regulations, filling out paperwork and going through the red tape. They have to pay people to do this, they may have to pay fees or other charges to the regulators, and this amount is an attempt to cover those costs. Remember that all of the costs of doing business have to be passed on to the consumer.
A $10.09 city utility users surcharge. Federal Universal Service Charge, that was $2.21. County 911 service fee, that was, looks like 70 cents. That's understandable. State 911 service fee, okay, so there's a separate one, that's 25 cents. Washington State Telecom Tax, $10.96. City Telecom Tax of $3.35, and City District Telecom Tax of $1.44. That adds up to about $29.50, roughly. And it was just kind of shocking that I would have $30 worth of fees just associated with the bill that I thought was expensive to begin with.
The thing is, it really shouldn't be shocking. It would be in all of our best interests if we paid more attention to the taxes we pay. The Occupy protesters yell and scream about corporate greed whenever they get a few more pennies from each of us in profits, but just look at how much more the government gets. Okay, this amount will vary from state to state, but still, when it comes to greed, the corporations are in infancy compared to GovCo.
That's a monthly charge for me. That's insane. It looks like DROD123180 says $47. I don't know, I was kind of appalled. But there's not really much I can do other than elect someone else who's probably going to raise my taxes or do nothing anyway. It's the same party here in the United States. No matter who you pick, no matter what they say, it's the same party. I don't care what anybody tells you.
Yes, Chris Pirillo is someone else who gets it. You're not going to get any kind of meaningful change or reform from Democrats or Republicans. It's definitely something to remember as we move into the 2012 election year. I don't think anyone will be surprised to hear of yet more atrocities against human liberty coming from a Muslim country under Sharia law. And to be honest, it happens so often that being outraged against yet another one gets to be a little tiring. Case in point, Mansour al-Marib, arrested under accusations of blasphemy, specifically insulting friends of Muslim Prophet Muhammad. He was convicted in just a few weeks and sentenced to 5 years in prison and, get this, 500 lashes. Why should you be more outraged about this one? Because it didn't happen in Iran or Pakistan or anywhere else the US currently opposes. The atrocity was committed by US ally Saudi Arabia, to whom the US sells tens of billions in arms in addition to giving billions in foreign aid. The punishment of 500 lashes is so severe that it's considered to be a death sentence, and al-Marib, who suffers from diabetes and heart disease, almost certainly wouldn't survive, all because the Saudi government doesn't recognize his fundamental right to freedom of speech. The next time our government tries to bring up propaganda against this country or that, supposedly because of atrocities committed there, remember this. Remember what this very important ally of the United States government has done, how our government is silent about it, and ask yourself if defending people against this kind of tyranny is really what those wars are all about. And now it's time to expose the execrable excretions exhaled by this week's biggest Bogon emitter. It's nice to keep things fresh, with new names and new Bogosities exposed every week. But unfortunately, when you have someone spewing out so much misinformation that no one else even compares, you just have to have repeat offenders. So this week, for the second week running, it's President Barack Obama. This time it's for a speech he gave in a lame attempt at self-aggrandizement, trying to associate himself with one of the more despicable characters in American politics as though it were a good thing.
And these values gave rise to the largest middle class and the strongest economy that the world has ever known. It was here in America that the most productive workers, the most innovative companies turned out the best products on earth. And you know what? Every American shared in that pride and in that success. From those in the executive suites, to those in middle management, to those on the factory floor. So you could have some confidence that if you gave it your all, you'd take enough home to raise your family and send your kids to school and have your health care covered, put a little away for retirement.
Yes, that is the result of the free market values that made the poor in this country wealthy before the advent of the progressive era. Of course, you just know he's going to twist it.
And today, we're still home to the world's most productive workers. We're still home to the world's most innovative companies. But for most Americans, the basic bargain that made this country great has eroded. Long before the recession hit, hard work stopped paying off for too many people. Fewer and fewer of the folks who contributed to the success of our economy actually benefited from that success. Those at the very top grew wealthier from their incomes and their investments, wealthier than ever before. But everybody else struggled with costs that were growing and paychecks that weren't. And too many families found themselves racking up more and more debt just to keep up.
Yes, as a result of the moral hazard created by our government, by Congress and the Federal Reserve, including measures that Obama himself voted for as senator. The big wealthy corporations were too big to fail, and everybody else had to be taxed and saddled with debt and impoverishment so that these cronies wouldn't have to face the consequences of their own bad decisions. Of course, he's going to twist this too.
But in 2008, the house of cards collapsed. And we all know the story by now. Mortgages sold to people who couldn't afford them.
Yes, as a result of government policy which sought to make more poor people homeowners.
Banks and investors allowed to keep packaging the risk and selling it off.
Allowed? Allowed? They weren't allowed to do this. They were actively enabled to do this by government, and in some cases even required.
Huge bets and huge bonuses made with other people's money on the line.
Yeah, just as the CRA, Fannie and Freddie, and other government policies, again, many of them supported and voted for by Senator Obama, were designed to do.
Regulators who were supposed to warn us about the dangers of all this, but looked the other way, or didn't have the authority to look at all.
And so the twisting begins. It was the fact that these poor regulators didn't have enough power. Give me a break! The regulations were what enabled it to happen in the first place. And there were, nonetheless, many economists who saw this problem coming and warned about it, and placed the blame squarely on government and Federal Reserve policy. They were warned. They chose not to listen.
Now, in the midst of this debate, there are some who seem to be suffering from a kind of collective amnesia. After all that's happened, after the worst economic crisis, the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, they want to return to the same practices that got us into this mess. In fact, they want to go back to the same policies that stacked the deck against middle-class Americans for way too many years.
Yes, and you're one of them.
And their philosophy is simple. We are better off when everybody's left to fend for themselves and play by their own rules.
What? How on earth is government shielding banks and lenders from risk, allowing them to fend for themselves? How on earth is the most regulated industry in the country left to play by their own rules? Now for the spin you knew was coming.
At the turn of the last century, when a nation of farmers was transitioning to become the world's industrial giant, we had to decide. Would we settle for a country where most of the new railroads and factories were being controlled by a few giant monopolies that kept prices high and wages low?
Anyone knowledgeable of history can tell you that the railroad monopolies and others existed because of government support, whereas the ones who were a threat to these government cronies, the ones who were called monopolists, Rockefeller, Swift, Carnegie, Heinz, Dow, and many others, rose up from poor families enabled by free market capitalism, became rich by competing against these interests in the most level playing field America has ever had. It was far from monopolistic. There was far more competition during this period than any period before or since.
Would we allow our citizens and even our children to work ungodly hours in conditions that were unsafe and unsanitary?
Again, anyone knowledgeable of history would tell you that child labor had pretty much been eliminated by this time. It's economic wealth, not government fiat, that enables this. They can also tell you that workplaces were already made safer and had better hours because of the free market innovation of unions. Unions that the government was fighting tooth and nail.
Theodore Roosevelt disagreed. He was the Republican son of a wealthy family. He praised what the titans of industry had done to create jobs and grow the economy.
He was also someone who tried to bring back the income tax, even though he knew the Supreme Court had declared it unconstitutional. He was a warmonger, proud of his carry a big stick policy. He was also an incredible racist, believing that minorities should be sterilized and even that minority babies should be aborted.
But Roosevelt also knew that the free market has never been a free license to take whatever you can from whomever you can. He understood that the free market only works when there are rules of the road that ensure competition is fair and open and honest. And so he busted up monopolies, forcing those companies to compete for consumers with better services and better prices.
Except that his actions resulted in fewer competitors and higher prices, and it reversed the decades-long trend in improvements in the economic stations of the poor and middle class. We don't have time to debunk all of the details. It is a long speech, so let's just skip to the ironic self-aggrandizement.
Remember that in those same years, thanks to some of the same folks who are now running Congress,
including you,
we had weak regulation. We had little oversight.
How high do you have to be in order to believe this? With tens of thousands of pages added to the Code of Federal Regulations every year, passed at the behest of corporate and banking cronies, how can he possibly say there was little regulation and oversight? It's simple, because he wants to draw the blame away from where it really lies.
And what did it get us? Insurance companies that jacked up people's premiums with impunity and denied care to patients who were sick? Mortgage lenders that tricked families into buying homes they couldn't afford? A financial sector where irresponsibility and lack of basic oversight nearly destroyed our entire economy.
Because of corporate protections that you helped put in place.
Look, if we had unlimited resources, no one would ever have to pay any taxes, and we would never have to cut any spending. But we don't have unlimited resources, and so we have to set priorities. If we want a strong middle class, then our tax code must reflect our values. We have to make choices.
And here Obama starts to set himself up as this century's Teddy Roosevelt. But hey, as another big government warmonger who cares nothing about civil liberties, it may just be the only honest thing he did in this entire speech.
Today that choice is very clear. To reduce our deficit, I've already signed nearly $1 trillion of spending cuts into law, and I've proposed trillions more.
This is an outright lie. He has not signed $1 trillion in spending cuts. He has not signed 1 penny in spending cuts. He's agreed to spend $1 trillion less than what the government was going to, but spending is still increasing. And this $1 trillion figure is over the next 10 years. Interesting how he left that bit out. Interesting also that this is the same lie that Republicans tell when they pretend to be for smaller government. Chris Pirillo was right. There really is only one party in this country. Just listen to this bit of statist apologetics.
A strong middle class can only exist in an economy where everyone plays by the same rules, from Wall Street to Main Street. As infuriating as it was for all of us, we rescued our major banks from collapse. Not only because a full-blown financial meltdown would have sent us into a second depression, but because we need a strong, healthy financial sector in this country.
So let me get this straight. We can only have a strong middle class where everybody plays by the same rules, and so you had to use our money and steal our wealth to bail out big banks from the consequences of their own bad decisions? No, there would have been no second Great Depression. We all would have been wealthier. Only these government cronies would have been put in the poorhouse. But listen to how this incredible prevaricator brings the speech home.
And we still believe in the words of the man who called for a new nationalism all those years ago. The fundamental rule of our national life, the rule which underlies all others, is that on the whole and in the long run, we shall go up or down together.
Except we're not. Due in large part to your own actions, Obama, you and your cronies keep going up while the rest of us, especially the poor, middle class, and small businesses, keep going down with no relief in sight. This has to be the biggest load of bogosity of your administration to date, which means that you and only you could possibly be this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And now it's time to admonish the audacity of this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire!
And again, this week it's a repeat offender, this time Texas Governor Rick Perry, whose presidential campaign produced an ad showing what a complete moron he is, and only the most brainless would ever vote for him. Warning, the Bogons in this video are every bit as big as they appear.
I'm not ashamed to admit that I'm a Christian.
Well, I'm not ashamed to admit that you're a nitwit. Oh, that is just so brave of you, admitting that you're a member of the supermajority religion in this country, represented by over 80% of the population. Yes, what courage it takes to be something that almost everyone agrees with.
But you don't need to be in the pew every Sunday to know that there's something wrong in this country when gays can serve openly in the military.
Yes, we Christians are just such a repressed group when we're not allowed to infringe on the rights of those we don't like. I got news for you, Governor. The gays who came out of the closet and fought for the rights of homosexuals to be a part of society, to great personal detriment, even in some cases their own murders, were far more brave than you are or ever will be. You don't even have a concept of what it means to be truly brave, you smug, arrogant, mealy-mouthed, cowardly doormat.
But our kids can't openly celebrate Christmas.
Yes, they can, you liar. They do it all the time. Geez, even the children of many atheist parents celebrate Christmas. One would think you'd be happy about that. Except that wouldn't at all fit in with your pathetic martyr complex, would it?
Pray in school.
Again, this is a lie. Children can pray in school all they want, and no one can stop them, as long as they're not disrupting class. What he's really talking about is the prohibition of public school teachers, government agents, from leading children in prayers. Once again, it's, poor us, we're so oppressed because we can't force our religion onto others. I wonder what this mouthpiece would say if children in schools were being led in prayer by a Muslim teacher who made them all pray to Allah while kneeling on mats facing Mecca.
As president, I'll end Obama's war on religion.
Not that I'm any kind of Obama defender, I did just make him this week's biggest Bogon emitter, but where exactly is he waging a war on religion? He's waging wars on brown people in the Middle East, he's waging the war on drugs here at home, he's waging a war on immigrants and on poor people and on small businesses, but where's the war on religion? Obama is a member of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, a puritanical Congregationalist church with extremist fundamentalist views. He and Perry, religiously speaking, are two peas in a pod.
Faith made America strong.
Really? Then how come faith didn't make all of those Christian theocracies throughout history strong? Why is it that America was finally able to break out of the poverty, misery, and bigotry of the past only with an age of enlightenment, which came with it not only religious skepticism, but a rugged individualism that eschews the very collectivist groupthink that Perry spews? The fact is, Perry doesn't have a clue what made America strong, doesn't have a clue what the principles behind this country are, and not only isn't fit to be president, also isn't fit to be anything other than this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire!
Well, that wraps up this imperturbable edition of the Bogosity podcast. Please visit the forums at Bogosity.tv, where you can read the show notes and participate in discussions about these subjects and anything else you'd like. And if you'd like to participate in the Bogosity podcast, you can send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@Bogosity.tv. If you put it in an MP3 file, it just might get played in the podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Carl Sagan. The fact that religions can be so shamelessly dishonest, so contemptuous of the intelligence of their adherents, and still flourish, does not speak very well for the tough-mindedness of the believers. But it does indicate, if a demonstration was needed, that near the core of the religious experience is something remarkably resistant to rational inquiry. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Imported License.